Long before their paths had crossed at the hotel, Brooke had carefully cultivated her circle of confidants. Each gathering served as a therapeutic escape from the chaos of her personal life, a place where stories were exchanged over glasses of wine and moments of levity softened the weight of past hardships. The women she surrounded herself with were a diverse group, some seasoned in navigating life's challenges, others newer to the art of resilience. Together, they formed a haven for unfiltered conversations, bound by an unspoken agreement to leave judgment at the door. The inn itself, perched on the edge of a quiet, picturesque town, was more than a meeting place. It was a sanctuary, imbued with the charm of old-world hospitality. From its wooden beams to the flickering lanterns on the terrace, it offered solace to weary souls, seeking respite from life's tribulations. It was here that Brooke's tale, marked by betrayal and determination, began to unfurl before a captive audience. "Have you been in touch with your ex since the divorce?" one of the women at the table inquired, taking a sip from her intricately designed wine glass. The group was relaxing on the terrace. Brooke paused to consider her response before saying, "No, not since I threw him out and served him both divorce papers and a restraining order. I haven't seen or heard from him. He tried reaching out to the kids, but they ignored him after I explained everything he put us through." Allie, a newer member of the circle, spoke up curiously. "Was the split that bad? It sounds like there's still a lot of hurt there." "How long ago did it happen?" "About a year back. That a-hole fought it tooth and nail for an entire year. When he finally realized the kids wanted nothing to do with him, he gave up, signed the documents, and disappeared. Altogether, he's been out of the picture for 2 years now." "Good riddance," Brooke replied, her tone sharp with lingering resentment. Allie's next question seemed inevitable. "What made you decide to leave him?" "You mean the divorce?" "Because he was unfaithful. He was seeing his old flame, Gemma Evans." From behind, a voice interjected, "Jake Van Dam, cheating? That doesn't sound like him at all. And as for cheating with me, I think I'd remember that. Don't you agree?" "Completely absurd. I suppose this is just another one of your twisted stories, Mrs. Brooke Paquette." Brooke whipped her head around so quickly that the others half expected her eyes to pop out. Well, look what the wind blew in. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here. And you've got plenty of gall yourself. You started manipulating Jake back when we were together. Your lies drove us apart, and now you're claiming he cheated on you with me? When exactly, pray tell?" Gemma responded sharply. 2 years ago, as you're well aware." Brooke's tone was sharp enough to leave a mark. Gemma sneered. "Oh, really? If I had been involved with Jake, don't you think I'd remember? 2 years ago, I was 5,000 miles away in Edinburgh, Scotland, studying general linguistics and tutoring students learning English. And I can prove it too, much more easily than you can prove you're even here right now. I just got back after 3 years abroad, and before that, I was teaching high school across the country." Brooke's face paled. This wasn't the scenario she had imagined, and it was bad news. "If it wasn't Miss Evans, then who did your ex cheat with?" Gemma pressed. Cornered, Brooke snapped, "He cheated on me, so I threw him out." Gemma wasn't about to let it go. "Oh, and in the process, you made sure he couldn't stay in this town, didn't you? Even his parents probably bought into your act. For the record, I don't believe he cheated. I think he caught on to you. Are those kids even his? Makes one wonder. Anyway, I have people to see, including Jake's parents." Brooke's face drained of color again. "Don't you dare! I'll ruin you if you do," Gemma smirked, her gaze cold. "Life hasn't been kind to you, has it? Seems like you're using more makeup than ever to cover the cracks. Relax, though. I'll save you the trouble. I'll be paying a visit to Jake's parents, and I have evidence to clear up your lies. By the way, thank you for driving him away. Once I find him, he'll be mine. As for your threats, please spare me. Tomorrow, I start my new job far from this viper's nest. Enjoy your lemons." With that, Gemma walked to her car and headed straight to the Van Dam residence. The house was just as she remembered, stately, with 3 parking spaces at the gate and 2 towering ginkgo biloba trees planted by Jake's ancestors. The long stone pathway led to a set of wide granite steps. She parked, grabbed her laptop from the trunk, and made her way to the front door. She knocked, and it was opened by Jake's grandfather. "Yes? How can I help you, young lady?" "Good afternoon, Mr. Van Dam. I'm Gemma Evans. Do you remember me?" "It's been a while." "Ah, yes. Weren't you mentioned in all that mess with Jake's marriage?" "Yes, sir. I'm here to tell you it was impossible for Jake to have had an affair with me. I was in Edinburgh at the time, and I can prove it." The old man studied her intently, his gaze sharp and probing. Gemma felt as though he could see right through her. After a moment, he smiled faintly. "Call me Rufus, the older Rufus," he added with a glint of humor. "It's brave of you to come. My son and his wife are convinced Jake is guilty." "Me? I've always doubted it. Jake's not that kind of man. So, why are you trying to clear his name?" Gemma knew this man would spot a lie in an instant, so she spoke honestly. "Because Jake doesn't know it yet, but I plan to be the next Mrs. Van Dam. First, though, I have to find him. Do you know where he is?" Rufus's eyes twinkled mischievously. "He told me not to share his whereabouts with anyone, but you're not just anyone. He's at St. Christopher's Crossing, doing well at the university there. Don't let on I told you." Gemma grinned. "Thank you. By the way, I'll be working at that university starting tomorrow, so I'm bound to see him." From deeper inside the house, a voice called out, "Dad, who's at the door? Don't let them sell you anything." Rufus chuckled. "You remember where the kitchen is?" Gemma nodded, but nearly collided with Jake's mother as she turned. Anna's expression twisted with anger. "You've got some nerve! Ruining my son's life and walking into this house uninvited? Get out!" Before Gemma could reply, Rufus growled, "Anna, she's my guest, and she deserves to be heard. She says she wasn't even here during all that nonsense." Anna hesitated, her anger faltering. "What? I don't believe it." Gemma raised her laptop. "I can show you." An hour later, Anna looked distraught, and Rufus was visibly furious. "Now what?" Anna whispered. Gemma opted for honesty again. "I'm not sure. Jake and I were close, and things might have turned romantic if Brooke hadn't interfered, but that's for Jake to decide. If I can find him." Anna, shocked by the revelations, decided her husband needed to hear this too. She smiled thinly. "Would you stay for dinner and share your story with Randall?" Gemma declined politely. "Thank you, but I need to prepare for my new job." She carefully avoided mentioning where she was heading. When Gemma was ready to leave, Anna pulled her aside, her tone hesitant and full of regret. Anna expressed a longing to reconnect with Jake, admitting that the family had made poor decisions and treated him unfairly. She asked Gemma to let them know if she ever found him. However, Gemma gently declined, explaining that Jake had disappeared for a reason, clearly not wanting to be found. She assured Anna she would pass along their message, but could not reveal his location. As Gemma made her way to her car, she spotted a man approaching. It didn't take long for her to recognize him as Jake's brother, Rufus. The sight of him was startling. He was past his prime, overweight, and lumbering with a gait that resembled a gorilla's. His large frame, thick neck, and heavy paunch were paired with wheezing breaths as he moved. Gemma continued to her car, hoping to avoid an encounter. Rufus, on the other hand, took note of her. She seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place her. His thoughts were less than polite, as he appraised her appearance with crudeness. When he entered the house, he casually asked his grandfather about the broad he saw leaving. The elder Van Dam remained impassive, merely stating that she was an old friend of Jake's. Rufus dismissed the information, but internally remained eager to keep his younger brother at a distance, for reasons of his own. Upstairs, Rufus retreated to his private apartment, designed for him after an accident rendered him a permanent resident of the family home. Meanwhile, Brooke reflected on her life and choices. By the time her divorce from Jake was finalized, he was 35 and she was 37. Their two children, born less than a year apart, were now 16 and 15. She thought back to when she first set her sights on Jake, who was just 18 at the time. Brooke had noticed him after a grueling 10-kilometer swim race, initially paying him no attention until a dark-haired girl began helping him out of his wetsuit. The interaction caught Brooke's interest. Observing him closely, she was struck by his athletic build. Broad shoulders, strong arms, and muscular legs. His reddish-brown hair, green eyes, and chiseled features completed the picture. Brooke, then in her 20s, decided she wanted him and began plotting to make it happen. Breaking through Jake's reserved nature took 6 months. Fortunately for Brooke, the girl who had been a close friend to Jake relocated, making it easier for Brooke to manipulate her way into his life. When Jake eventually invited her to meet his family at a barbecue, she learned he was the youngest of 3, with a brother and sister several years older. At the barbecue, Brooke couldn't help but compare Jake to his older brother, Rufus. Although they shared similar features, their differences were stark. Jake was lean, with understated strength and a calm, thoughtful demeanor. Rufus, by contrast, was larger, louder, and aggressive, flaunting his strength and speaking with bluster. Rufus quickly noticed Brooke, his resentment toward his younger brother fueling his interest. He viewed Jake as too clever and decided to seduce Brooke. Within 2 weeks, Rufus had charmed and manipulated her into meeting him at a hotel. What followed was a raw, overpowering encounter that left Brooke reeling. Rufus showed no concern for her enjoyment, treating her like a conquest rather than a partner. His disdainful attitude extended to dismissing protection, leaving Brooke vulnerable. A month later, Brooke realized she was pregnant. When she confronted Rufus, he mocked her, telling her to pin the pregnancy on Jake or terminate it. Shocked and desperate, Brooke chose the former. She seduced Jake, surprised by the stark contrast between the two brothers. Jake was gentle, considerate, and far more attentive, traits Rufus lacked entirely. Brooke carried on, convincing Jake the child was his, while keeping the truth about Rufus hidden. Over time, the differences between the two men became even clearer. Jake's love and devotion clashed sharply with Rufus's brutishness and selfishness. Despite her manipulations, Brooke found herself trapped in a web of her own making, with guilt and regret lingering just beneath the surface. Brooke lay underwear on the bed of the same hotel room where she had first been with Rufus. She initially wanted to rush through the experience, but Jake had other plans. He took his time, bringing her to climax multiple times with unrelenting focus. When she was finally spent, lying beside him, her hand wandered to his shorts. The moment she felt him, she froze in disbelief at his size. Nervousness crept in as she wondered how she could handle him, but Jake's tender care eased her fears. He wiped her face with a damp cloth, his calm and considerate nature further disarming her. Despite her apprehension, Jake gently guided her, allowing her to take the lead. As she hesitated, her body responded instinctively, preparing for him. The experience, far from the discomfort she had anticipated, became something she began to enjoy. His deliberate movements and attention to her every reaction sent waves of pleasure coursing through her. She lost track of time, her mind blank except for the sensations consuming her. By the end, she was utterly overwhelmed, her body trembling as she collapsed beside him. Jake's kindness extended beyond the bedroom. When she struggled to stand afterward, he supported her, helped her to the bathroom, and made sure she was safe and comfortable. As he showered, Brooke lay in bed, lost in thought. The experience had been unlike anything she'd ever known. Jake was patient, caring, and attentive. Everything Rufus was not. The stark contrast between the two brothers made her realize how much she valued Jake. Yet, even as she admired him, a selfish part of her craved the thrill Rufus provided, despite his flaws. 3 months later, Brooke and Jake married in a quiet ceremony. Brooke settled into her new life with a devoted husband who treated her with love and respect. She enjoyed the stability Jake provided, but she couldn't resist the temptation of keeping Rufus as a side fling. For Brooke, Rufus was merely a distraction, a quick and detached indulgence that didn't compare to the depth of her relationship with Jake. She justified her actions by focusing on how effortlessly she juggled her double life. Years passed, and Brooke continued her precarious balancing act. However, Rufus's reckless lifestyle eventually caught up with him. 13 years after their first encounter, his excessive use of anabolic steroids led to a catastrophic heart incident. While at the gym, he collapsed, saved only by the quick actions of a nurse exercising nearby. Emergency responders managed to stabilize him with CPR and rushed him to the hospital. Tests revealed that Rufus had suffered a myocardial rupture, a direct consequence of prolonged steroid use. He was whisked into emergency surgery, his life hanging by a thread. The event was a harsh reckoning for Rufus and a sobering reminder of the choices that had led him to this point. Rufus left the hospital a changed man, his once muscular physique reduced to flabby weakness. His body, ravaged by years of steroid use, now required constant care and attention. Bitter and resentful, he began manipulating Brooke, planting seeds of dissatisfaction in her mind. He criticized Jake relentlessly, urging Brooke to demand more from her husband, more money, more effort, and more luxury, while playing the helpless victim of his own circumstances. Over time, Rufus's influence began to show. Brooke's attitude toward Jake soured, her frustrations spilling out in constant nagging. Small annoyances became major arguments, and she started pushing Jake harder than ever. She demanded a new car, claiming the old one was beneath her. Meanwhile, Jake endured her outbursts in silence, absorbing each blow without retaliation. Their children, however, began to voice their discomfort, openly wondering how much more their father could take. One evening, during yet another tirade, Jake silently walked away, leaving Brooke mid-rant. Furious, she screamed after him, but he retreated to his office and slammed the door. When she followed him moments later, his response was explosive. For the first time in their marriage, Jake roared at her to leave him alone, his voice carrying the weight of years of pent-up frustration. At that moment, Brooke realized she had pushed Jake to his breaking point. She had always underestimated him, assuming he would never fight back. What she failed to understand was that Jake was the type of man who endured quietly until he didn't. And when he reached that limit, his reaction was swift and decisive. Jake's patience had run out. He reflected on the deep rift in their relationship and the toll it had taken on his spirit. He knew he needed to protect himself, not only emotionally, but also financially. Years earlier, anticipating trouble with his father and brother at the family business, Jake had taken precautions. Despite being groomed by his grandfather to become the company's technical executive, his father had pushed him aside, likely influenced by Rufus. When his father eventually fired him on a technicality, Jake walked away without regret. After leaving the family company, Jake was quickly scooped up by its biggest competitor, who offered him a flexible, well-paying position with excellent benefits. On the advice of his grandfather, Jake had also established his own freelance business in Luxembourg, funneling most of the income into offshore accounts. This financial independence had always been a quiet safety net, one Brooke never questioned, assuming it was merely extra earnings from side projects. Now, Jake decided to make significant changes. He redirected all freelance income to his offshore accounts, cut back his workload, and committed to spending more time with his children. He was done with the grueling hours and the endless demands. The next morning, Jake sat in the kitchen sipping coffee and reading the news on his tablet when Brooke stormed in, demanding to know why he hadn't come to bed. Jake, calm but firm, responded that she had likely waited only minutes before falling asleep, and he had no intention of discussing her accusations further. Before Brooke could unleash a tirade, Jake interrupted. He laid out his decision. He had returned all freelance assignments and reduced his work week to 30 hours. If she wanted more money, she could get a job herself. He also addressed her behavior, making it clear that her constant disrespect was pushing their marriage to the brink of divorce. Without waiting for a response, Jake walked out, announcing he was going out for breakfast, a rare indulgence for himself. Stunned, Brooke sat in silence, unable to process the transformation in her husband. She had never seen him so resolute. Finally, she picked up her phone and called Rufus, desperate for guidance. She complained about Jake's newfound defiance, but Rufus only laughed, reassuring her that he had anticipated this and had a backup plan in place. Jake was reviewing some documents at his desk when his secretary called to inform him of an unexpected visitor. He confirmed he had no appointment scheduled, but the visitor insisted it was urgent. Jake sighed, weary from weeks of escalating tensions with Brooke. Their marriage had deteriorated rapidly after his ultimatum to reduce his work hours and prioritize his own well-being. Brooke had retaliated with a sharp ultimatum of her own. No money, no intimacy. Jake, unshaken, moved into the guest room, leaving Brooke fuming. While Brooke's frustration grew, her attempts to seduce Jake into submission failed. Rufus, her fallback, proved useless, unable to satisfy her due to his declining health and physical condition. Within weeks, Brooke's frustrations peaked, but Jake remained unmoved. That morning, an elderly woman entered Jake's office, handed him 2 sealed envelopes, and delivered the words, "No one wants to hear. You've been served." She apologized before leaving, adding a warning to Jake's secretary to keep an eye on him. Jake stared at the envelopes, feeling a mix of relief and anguish. He expected divorce papers, but was blindsided by a restraining order barring him from contacting Brooke, their children, or his parents. Worse, the documents included a sworn affidavit falsely alleging an affair with Gemma Evans. The betrayal stung deeply, but Jake resolved to act swiftly. He blocked their shared accounts, sought legal counsel through a professional contact, and leased a small flat to weather the storm. The betrayal crystallized his determination to protect himself and his future. Meanwhile, Brooke overheard her children, Olivia and Brian, discussing their struggles. When Brian expressed a desire to talk to his father, Brooke suggested Rufus instead. Olivia's sharp reply stunned her mother. Olivia called Rufus a disgusting, sweaty pervert and revealed disturbing behavior, offering money for inappropriate favors. Brooke was horrified. Could Rufus really have acted this way toward his own daughter? That evening, more unsettling truths emerged. Confronted with Rufus's predatory nature, Brooke could no longer ignore the danger he posed, not only to her children, but also to herself. Despite their issues, Jake's influence on the children had instilled in them a sense of self-respect that shielded them from Rufus's worst. However, Brooke now faced the grim reality of being financially tied to Rufus. Jake's steady child support had sustained her lifestyle, but she feared that source of stability might soon end. For the first time, she began to regret her decisions. At the university, Gemma Evans met Professor Leonard Daltrey, who welcomed her warmly. A widower with a girlfriend, Daltrey described the ins and outs of campus life and mentioned her temporary housing arrangement with his friend Nathaniel Thompson. He suggested she consider settling in St. Christopher's Wood, where faculty could access prime housing plots. He wistfully mentioned a talented part-time amanuensis, skilled in working with children with behavioral and learning difficulties, who had designed a nearby center for such students. Though the man had declined teaching roles, Daltrey admired his work and hoped to recruit him. Exploring the area with Nadia Thompson, Gemma stumbled upon a sign advertising land for sale with an approved building permit. Enchanted by the location, she expressed her desire to build a home there but worried about finding the right designer. Nadia reassured her, mentioning a friend who was both an aeronautical engineer and an accomplished designer. "He's building his own house nearby," Nadia explained. "He's a bit reclusive, but he's good company once he warms up. I'll invite him to dinner Friday so you can meet him." Delighted by the prospect, Gemma agreed enthusiastically, eager to meet the mysterious designer. At the Van Dam estate, Brooke stood nervously across from Rufus Van Dam Sr., her voice uncharacteristically small as she asked, "Granddad, do you know where Jake is?" The old man studied her closely, noting her distress and the cracks in her usually composed demeanor. A sharp observer of human behavior, he already suspected what she was about to reveal. "I won't confirm or deny that, dear," he replied evenly. "Why do you ask? Trouble in paradise?" Brooke's startled expression gave her away, though she stopped herself from blurting out an answer. Her hesitation didn't escape Rufus Sr.'s notice. He decided it was time to stop indulging her facade. In a cold, cutting tone, he remarked, "Rufus has always had some vile tendencies, hasn't he? And his steroid obsession hasn't helped." Brooke stammered in protest, but Rufus Sr. was unrelenting. "Don't play dumb with me, young lady. I may be old, but I'm far from senile. Let's not pretend those kids of yours share Jake's DNA. Your blue eyes, Jake's green, and both children have brown. That's almost impossible genetically. They resemble Jake only because Rufus and Jake looked alike when they were younger. But Rufus has brown eyes, and you've spent far too much time in his bed." Brooke's world seemed to collapse around her. She gripped the chair for support, unable to form a coherent response. Rufus Sr. pressed on mercilessly. "You aligned yourself with the wrong man, drove the good one away, and now you're here expecting me to help you fix your mess? Whether or not I know where Jake is, I won't help you. Get out." As Brooke fled, the old man stood by the window, deep in thought. Perhaps it was finally time to write that letter he'd been putting off. Meanwhile, Gemma was waiting at the Thompsons' door, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. She had been renting their guest house for months, but this was her first invitation into their home. When the door opened, she was greeted by Nathaniel, who introduced himself warmly. She noted the deep scar running along his otherwise handsome face and his slight limp, wondering what had happened to him. Inside, she met Nadia and their little boy, Jakob, who seemed shy but polite. Over tea, Gemma complimented their home, calling it stunning and asking how they'd found such a gem. Nadia hesitated, her face clouding briefly before she replied, "It's a long, complicated story with a happy ending. It's also Nathan's story, so I'd need his blessing to share it. Let's just say he wrestled this place out of the hands of some local tyrants." Curious, Gemma asked if Nathan had been married before. Nadia explained that Jakob was Nathan's son from his first marriage, and that Nathan was a widower. Then, with a bright smile, Nadia shared some happy news. She was expecting. Gemma hugged her warmly, thrilled for her. Just as she was about to ask when the baby was due, Nathan appeared and introduced a visitor. Gemma froze. "Jake!" she exclaimed, rushing to hug him. But Jake remained stiff and distant, his only response a cool, "Gemma, long time. No see." Her joy evaporated as she stepped back, confusion and hurt written all over her face. Nathan and Nadia exchanged glances before Nathan said gently, "You two should talk. Use the office." Once inside, Jake turned to her, his expression guarded. "Gemma," he began, "you signed an affidavit claiming we had an affair while I was married to Brooke. That lie destroyed my marriage. Why would I be happy to see you?" Gemma felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. The full weight of Brooke's manipulations hit her, and anger boiled within. Straightening her back, she looked Jake in the eye, her voice steady and resolute. She was determined to set things right. Jake was stunned as Gemma launched into her explanation. She began by assuring him that during the years she spent in Europe, she never communicated with Brooke, nor would she have shared personal details with her. Gemma recounted a moment when she publicly corrected Brooke after overhearing her lies in a pub. Following that confrontation, she met with Jake's parents and grandfather, sharing the truth about her whereabouts. It was his grandfather who hinted that Jake might be nearby, prompting her to seek him out. When Jake hesitantly asked about the affidavit, Gemma's response was unequivocal. It was forged. She insisted she would never have betrayed him while he was married, nor would she have lied about such a thing. Jake, visibly shaken, confessed he had believed she had betrayed him and struggled with that belief for years. Yet, as she spoke, he began to trust her again, recalling her honesty during their friendship and the verifiable details she had just shared. Relieved, Gemma took a deep breath and, summoning her courage, asked if they could reconcile. Jake stepped forward, holding her close, and asked if she could forgive him for doubting her. Gemma immediately dismissed the idea of blame, reminding him that he had been manipulated. As Jake leaned in for a cheek kiss, Gemma turned her head, capturing his lips in a passionate kiss, surprising him with the intensity of her affection. Jake, still processing the moment, marveled at her boldness. Gemma, her voice light but firm, declared she had been waiting for this chance since learning he was no longer with Brooke. She made it clear she wasn't giving up on him, no matter how long it took. Jake admitted his struggles, explaining the isolation he sought while building his remote home. He described himself as damaged goods, revealing the emotional scars he had yet to heal. Gemma, unwavering, promised to stand by him through it all. She then hinted at suspicions about the paternity of Jake's son, suggesting there might be more to uncover. When they rejoined Nathan and Nadia, Gemma announced with quiet confidence that the issue between her and Jake was resolved. Nadia, delighted, teased her about her quick work. Gemma smiled, pulling Jake closer, and revealed her intentions: to never let Jake out of her sight again, to seek justice for his past, and to inquire about purchasing the plot of land she had admired earlier. The dinner that followed was lively, with Gemma sharing warm stories from her past with Jake. But the mood turned serious when she asked Jake a pointed question. How had Brooke managed to deliver a fully developed baby after a 6.5-month pregnancy? Jake admitted he had never questioned it at the time, overwhelmed by the experience of becoming a father. Nathan gently suggested the possibility of a setup, given how suspicious the timeline seemed. Though Jake initially resisted the idea, noting the strong resemblance between the children and himself, Nadia pressed further. She asked if there was anyone else in the family who looked similar to Jake. Gemma immediately pointed to Rufus, suggesting he might be the key to the mystery. Jake hesitated, reluctant to consider such a possibility, but Nadia's practical approach prevailed. She proposed a paternity test, advising Jake to seek legal representation. Turning to Nathan, she urged him to contact Donna Marshall, a renowned attorney known for her unmatched skills. Jake, though shaken, nodded in agreement, realizing it was time to uncover the truth once and for all. Brooke was spiraling. 2 weeks after Jake's grandfather bluntly refused to help her locate him, she was still drowning in her predicament. She no longer wanted Rufus around her children, but she felt financially dependent on him. Preparing dinner one evening while the kids worked on school assignments, she was startled by a knock at the door. Peering out, she saw a man and a woman standing on her porch. Opening the door cautiously, she asked, "What can I do for you?" The woman spoke first, confirming Brooke's identity as Mrs. Paquette, formerly married to Jake Van Dam. Brooke nodded warily, and the man then presented a warrant, explaining they were there to collect DNA samples from her children. Any refusal would lead to her arrest. "What? Why do you need their DNA?" Brooke demanded. "For a paternity test," the woman replied flatly. The ground seemed to fall out from under Brooke. She had always clung to the hope that Jake's bond with the children might one day bring him back to her, and the substantial child support payments that sustained her lifestyle. If the test proved they weren't his, all of that would vanish. At the Van Dam estate, another pair of officials arrived at Rufus Jr.'s apartment, accompanied by a police officer. Rufus Sr. observed the scene silently, thinking, Gemma must have found Jake. Now the reckoning begins. When Rufus Jr. refused to cooperate and lashed out at the officer, it took only moments for the younger, stronger man to subdue him. Rufus Sr. watched his grandson take a humiliating walk to the police car, his hands cuffed behind his back. 2 weeks later, Gemma burst into Jake's apartment holding a sealed envelope. "The results are here," she called out, her voice a mix of anticipation and dread. She knew the outcome would be life-altering, and she steeled herself to support Jake no matter what. They sat on the couch together as Jake opened the envelope and read the report. His face turned pale, and Gemma's concern deepened. "Jake," she said gently, "are you okay? You look like you're going to have a heart attack." Jake shook his head, his voice hard with anger. "I'm not having a heart attack, but I'm about to cause some. Both kids are Rufus's. That cheating ex-wife of mine and that bastard are going to pay for everything they've done to me." Gemma leaned into him, her presence warm and grounding. She had been patient with Jake, knowing he was still healing. Though they had shared moments of closeness, cuddles and chaste kisses, he had held back, and she respected his pace. Yet, as she looked into his eyes now, she saw a vulnerability that melted her heart. "Gemma," Jake began hesitantly, "I love you. I always have. But I feel like I let you down when I let Brooke manipulate me. I want to be with you, but I need to finish this chapter of my life first. You deserve more than a rebound. If you can't wait for me, I understand." Relief washed over Gemma. She knew how difficult it was for Jake to express his emotions, and his words affirmed his love and respect for her. Smiling, she cupped his face and kissed him deeply, her touch filled with reassurance and devotion. Jake pulled back, startled by her intensity. "You're not taking the out I just offered?" he asked, half in disbelief. "Not a chance," she replied softly. "I'm here, Jake. I'll be with you through it all." Jake hugged her tightly, whispering shyly, "Would you hold off on building your house until this is resolved? You might not need it. I can expand mine to make it our home." Gemma was stunned. "Is that an invitation to live with you?" she asked. "It is," he said earnestly. "I'm as committed to you as you are to me. If you want a ring and a wedding, I'll give you that. But to me, all that matters is that we're in this together." Gemma smiled. "Yes, I want a ring, something simple and timeless for both of us. Once this mess is behind us, we'll jump over a broom if we have to." A week later, Jake and Gemma sat in attorney Donna Marshall's office. Jake explained his desire for retribution, leaving no stone unturned. Donna, while sympathetic, admitted she wasn't the best fit for the aggressive legal strategy Jake needed. However, she referred him to a trusted colleague, an attorney who specialized in dismantling the kind of manipulative schemes Jake had endured. "This lawyer thrives in murky waters," Donna assured them. "If anyone can get you the justice you deserve, it's her." Jake and Gemma exchanged a look, ready to take the next step together. Sometime later, Brooke clung to a fragile sense of peace in the weeks following the DNA tests, hoping the storm had somehow passed. She had confided in Jake's grandfather, who helped her shield the children from Rufus Jr.'s influence. Rufus Jr., cowed by his recent police encounter, stayed away, for now. But as she prepared dinner one evening, a furious pounding on the front door shattered her illusions. When she opened it, Rufus Jr. stood there, purple-faced and trembling with rage. "What is this?" he bellowed, waving a crumpled stack of papers. Brooke stepped back instinctively. "I don't know. You tell me." Rufus shoved the papers at her. "Your precious Jake is demanding an obscene amount of money from me for raising my children, and to enforce it, he's frozen all my assets." Brooke staggered back, sinking into a chair. The reality hit her like a freight train. "Jake knows. He's awake and coming for us." The thought of his wrath sent chills through her. She knew her life of luxury was over, and panic began to set in. Rufus was still ranting when another knock at the door interrupted him. Brooke hesitated, but the persistent knocking left her no choice. She opened it to find a small man with round glasses and a mustache, accompanied by a woman filming with a camcorder. "Mrs. Brooke Paquette?" the man asked. When Brooke nodded, he handed her an envelope. "You've been served. Have a nice day." Brooke closed the door with trembling hands and returned to her chair. Opening the envelope, her worst fears were confirmed. The documents outlined DNA results proving Jake wasn't the father of her children, but Rufus was. There were also demands for reimbursement of child support with interest and damages for fraud and deception. The total was staggering. Adding to her horror, Gemma Evans had filed a separate lawsuit for defamation and falsifying an affidavit. Brooke's panic spiraled until Rufus assured her the company would cover her legal costs. "You're the mother of my kids," he said smugly. "I'll take care of it." That evening, during a tense family dinner, Rufus Jr. made a bold announcement. He declared that he and Brooke had developed feelings for each other, and she was now his girlfriend. He vowed to care for their children, while the company's lawyers fought Jake's ridiculous demands. Rufus Sr. interrupted quietly, but firmly. You'll need to find your own lawyer. The company won't fund your defense. Jake has suffered enough because of you. The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the table. Rufus Jr.'s father, Randall, exploded. What? He's entitled to defend himself against these baseless accusations. The company has excellent lawyers. Use them. Rufus Sr.'s voice turned icy. The accusations aren't baseless. They're backed by DNA evidence. Rufus and Brooke have been deceiving Jake from the start. Jake's demands are valid, and our company has strict rules about fraternization. Rufus broke every single one. If our lawyers get involved, it will be to enforce those rules, not protect him. Randall bristled. I'm the CEO, not you. Rufus Sr. laughed bitterly. And I own 70% of the company. As chairman of the board, I overrule you. The company's resources won't be wasted on this sham. Furious, Rufus Jr. kicked his chair across the room and stormed out. In the hallway, he stood panting, trying to regain his composure. Rufus Sr. followed him out, his voice dripping with venom. If you try to hurt Jake again, I'll bury you so deep the devil won't find you, he growled. Rufus Jr. sneered. And how do you plan to do that, old man? I have friends too. Rufus Sr. leaned in close. Try me. You'll find out this old dog still has teeth. He turned to leave, but patted Rufus Jr.'s back mockingly. You should work on your health. You won't live to see old age like this. The next morning, at breakfast, Randall and Rufus Jr. pressed Rufus Sr. to reconsider using company lawyers. But after reviewing the evidence, the patriarch was resolute. If I find out you've even consulted a company lawyer, you'll both be out on the street before you know what hit you, understood? With that, he left the room and returned to his office. Sitting at his desk, he dialed the University of St. Christopher's Crossing. Good morning, this is Professor Van Dam. Could I speak with Professor Daltrey, please? It's rather important. A familiar voice greeted Rufus Sr. warmly over the phone. Rufus, old friend, it's been too long. How are you? Rufus Sr. smiled faintly, though his tone was serious. Mentally sharp as ever, Leon. Physically, not so much. But that's a conversation for another day. Right now, I need a favor, one that involves two of your people. Anything for you, Leon replied. You were there for me during that nasty business with Short, when he was blackmailing students. It's my turn to repay the kindness. Rufus Sr. hesitated before continuing. I'm not sure you'll like it. I plan to visit and convince two of your employees to join my company. Which two? Leon asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Jake Van Dam and Gemma Evans. Leon sighed. I can understand wanting Jake, but Gemma? She sought me out after hearing rumors about Jake's marriage. She wanted to clear his name and find him after his divorce. From what I've gathered, she succeeded, and I suspect the two are inseparable now. Leon paused. When are you coming? I'll make sure they're available. I can leave in 30 minutes. It's a 2-hour drive. I'd like you there as well. You've got it, Leon said. See you soon. Later that day, Leon was shocked to see how frail his old friend had become. Though Rufus Sr. looked tired and worn, his voice remained steady, and his eyes still carried their familiar spark. Before summoning Jake and Gemma, the two men shared a quiet, intense conversation. In Leon's office, Jake and Gemma joined the older men. The reunion between Jake and his grandfather was bittersweet. Happiness mingled with the regret of lost time. Once they'd embraced, Rufus Sr. got straight to the point. Jake, I need you to run the company for me. Jake stared at him, stunned. Granddad, why? What about Dad and Rufus? Rufus Sr.'s smile was tinged with sadness. I'm ill, Jake. It's progressive. I'm nearing the point where I can't keep the terrible twosome from destroying the company. I've seen you work. I know you're capable of leading. Jake, visibly shaken, squeezed Gemma's hand. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I had my reasons, but the real question is, will you do it? Your girlfriend's input matters too. Jake glanced at Gemma. Granddad, I'm building a home for us here, a family house. Gemma's head snapped up, surprised. A family house? So much for taking things slow. Smirking, she quipped. Should I stop taking the pill? Jake didn't miss a beat. As soon as possible, I'd love to have a few kids with you. Gemma leaped out of her chair and kissed him fiercely. Last one was yesterday, she said with a grin. That answer your question? Rufus Sr. coughed gently. Jake, Gemma, may I remind you we're not alone. And Jake, the company is less than an hour from here. Jake met Gemma's eyes and she nodded her approval. Okay, Granddad, but what about Dad and Rufus? They'll be dealt with. You won't have to worry about them. When do you want me to start? Jake asked. Rufus Sr.'s voice softened. Soon. I don't have much time. I'll be entering a clinic in about 10 days to ease my passing. After that, you can step in. Gemma frowned. Why all the secrecy? Rufus Sr. sighed. Randall and Rufus will fight to keep their cushy lives, even resorting to violence. I've already had to warn Rufus off using company lawyers to fight the lawsuits you've initiated, Leon interjected. We've devised a plan to ensure your safety and protect the company. Rufus Sr. gestured for Leon to continue. Once Rufus passes, trusted managers will implement a full lockdown of the company. I'm creating software to secure everything, similar to ransomware. Employees will be sent home on full pay during the transition. When the will is read, everything will fall into place, and you'll take over. Jake and Gemma were stunned by the scope of the plan. What about us? Jake asked. You'll stay out of it until the will is read, Leon explained. The rest will be handled. Jake's grandfather added, I'll write you a letter explaining everything. For now, it's best you stay in the dark. Jake's voice quivered. Granddad? Can I visit you in the clinic? No, Jake. I want to face the end alone. Remember me as I was. Take care of your mother. She's as much an innocent victim as you. Jake nodded, his voice heavy with emotion. I promise. The two embraced, their goodbye laden with unspoken words. As Jake and Gemma left, the weight of the conversation settled on them. Back at Jake's apartment, he broke the silence with a deep sigh. I'll miss him. He was more of a father to me than my own ever was. Gemma wrapped her arms around him, offering the only comfort she could. I know, she whispered. 2 weeks later, Jake had just wrapped up negotiations with a contractor recommended by Nathan. The goal was to finish the house quickly and to high standards. After deciding to settle down with Gemma, Jake had expanded the plans considerably. 5 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, geothermal heating, solar panels, and wind turbines. This would be a home for the future, built to last. As he sat in front of the unfinished house, a letter arrived bearing grim news. His grandfather had passed. Gemma found Jake reading it, and though she tried to console him, the weight of the loss was evident. It feels like I've lost a part of myself, Jake said quietly. The next day, a summons arrived for the reading of Rufus Sr.'s will. Jake, accompanied by Gemma, prepared himself for what was sure to be an emotional ordeal. As they drove, he noticed a black sedan tailing them. Concerned, Jake pulled into a mall parking lot, ready to confront whoever it was. The sedan stopped beside them, and a woman stepped out, flashing her FBI badge. We're here to ensure your safety, she explained. Please act as though you're unaware of us at the reading. It's all part of Mr. Van Dam's plan. Inside the lawyer's office, Jake entered the conference room, leaving Gemma in the waiting area. His father, Randall, and Rufus Jr. were already seated. The moment Jake walked in, Rufus Jr. sneered. Look who's here. Hoping to scavenge something, little rat. I'll make sure you leave with nothing. The lawyer's sharp voice cut through the tension. Sir, if you can't behave, you'll be removed. Understood? Rufus grumbled but stopped short of responding further. Randall seemed ready to interject, but wisely stayed silent after the lawyer's stern glare. With order restored, the reading began. As the lawyer read aloud, Jake's name caught his attention. All possessions listed with this office, including chairmanship of Van Dam Aeronautical Industries, are hereby transferred to my only son, Jacob Randall Van Dam. Jake was stunned. Only son? That's Dad, isn't it? What's happening? Randall erupted. I'm his son, and Rufus is my son. This is fraud, and I'll tear you apart. He lunged toward the lawyer, only to stop short as 4 massive men entered the room, taking positions beside him and Rufus Jr. One of them growled, You're not going to make me hurt you, are you? Randall backed down immediately, but Rufus Jr. wasn't as restrained. He lunged at Jake, shouting, I'll liquidate you, you bastard! Within moments, one of the guards had subdued him, leaving Rufus clutching his wrist in pain and seated again. Calm returned to the room as the lawyer continued. Mr. Van Dam anticipated this behavior, which is why these gentlemen are here. Now let me explain. Genetic evidence proves that Mr. Randall Van Dam is not the biological son of Rufus Van Dam Sr. Furthermore, Rufus Jr. is not his grandson. The room fell silent as the lawyer paused, then addressed Randall directly. When Mr. Van Dam learned of your treatment of your wife and your misuse of company funds for personal indulgences, such as leasing an apartment and hiring escorts, he made your wife an offer. She agreed, and she was inseminated with his seed. The genetic evidence confirms that Jacob Randall Van Dam is his son, not yours. Randall turned a livid shade of red before exploding in rage. Lunging at his wife, he screamed, You cheated on me, you hoe! I'll sell you to a Russian brothel. I'll make you pay for this. The guards moved swiftly, restraining him before he could cause harm. Meanwhile, Rufus Jr. sat gasping, his face a picture of shock and fury. The lawyer remained calm, his voice firm. Any further outbursts, and you'll both be removed. We have notarized affidavits and indisputable genetic proof to support everything outlined here. Your actions have consequences, gentlemen, and the law will take its course. Jake sat quietly, processing the bombshell revelations. His mother, serene and composed, offered him a small, reassuring smile. Beside her, Randall and Rufus writhed in impotent rage as the lawyer moved on to finalize the reading, sealing their fates. 2 weeks later, the lawyer turned to Randall and Rufus Jr. and delivered a sharp blow. Please note their behavior and threats for the file, he said to his assistants. Then, addressing Randall, he continued, You won't be doing anything to anyone. We have proof of massive embezzlement totaling $6 million, funding your depraved lifestyle. That doesn't include the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. On top of that, you sold sensitive technology to rogue states and competitors. Federal agencies, the FBI, IRS, and others, are eager to have a long conversation with both of you. He turned to the guards. Escort these men out and hand them over to the authorities. Outside, Brooke waited. She had seen Jake enter the building earlier with Gemma, her arm possessively around him. Her faint hope of rekindling something with Jake dimmed as the reality of his new relationship set in. 30 minutes later, her world crumbled further. She watched as Randall and Rufus Jr. were let out in cuffs, read their rights, and whisked away in separate police cars. Overwhelmed, she approached one of the guards. What's going on? What happened in there? The guard responded curtly. They're wanted for fraud, embezzlement, and industrial espionage. Likely won't see the light of day for 20 years. Brooke's stomach sank. Who's going to run Van Dam Industries? The guard shrugged. The other man, Jake Van Dam. Realizing everything Rufus had promised was gone, Brooke stumbled to Rufus's car, found the keys inside, and drove home, lost in despair. Months later, Brooke was desperate. Her meager income barely covered basic needs, let alone the luxurious lifestyle she had once enjoyed. Bills piled up, and the children's tuition weighed heavily on her mind. She saw only one solution: manipulate Jake into taking her back. Standing underwear before the mirror, Brooke failed to see how years of hard partying, heavy drinking, and substance obsession had ravaged her body. Plastic surgery at Rufus's insistence had left her with an artificial appearance. Her skin sagged unnaturally, her bosom implants looked stiff and unnatural, and her once attractive face was overly smoothed and expressionless. Despite this, Brooke felt confident she could win Jake back and push Gemma out of the picture. Early morning, parked near Jake's house, Brooke waited for Gemma to leave. As soon as she saw the blue Nissan Rogue drive away, she checked her makeup, pulled down her blouse to enhance her cleavage, and approached the house. She knocked, her eyes scanning the home Jake had designed. She dismissed its unique charm, already planning how to improve it to her tastes. The door opened, revealing Jake, his expression unreadable. He didn't invite her in, simply stood and stared. Squaring her shoulders, Brooke forced a sultry tone. Jake, you're looking good. Life's treating you well, I see. What do you want, Brooke? Jake replied bluntly. I thought we could talk. Aren't you going to invite me in? Jake sighed. Let's get this over with. He stepped aside and led her to his office. Keeping her from seeing the rest of the house, he gestured for her to sit, then settled across the desk. Speak. What do you want? Brooke hesitated. Aren't you going to show me the house first? No. Now tell me why you're here. Brooke leaned forward, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. Jake, we belong together. We have history. 2 children. It's time for us to fix this. Jake's expression hardened. We do have history, but my version is far different from yours. You're out of your mind if you think we'll ever be together again. Unfazed, Brooke pressed on. I made mistakes, but we have the children to think about. I can't provide for them properly. They're not my children, Brooke. DNA proved they're Rufus's. Why should I be responsible? You raised them for years. Rufus never cared for them the way you did. Jake sighed. Don't worry about the kids. I'll take care of them, but not for you. My mother begged me to look out for them, so I've made arrangements. They'll have everything they need, but you won't get a cent. I'm not funding your lifestyle. Brooke sat in stunned silence as Jake's words slammed the door on her plans. Brooke sat stiffly, her frustration mounting. This wasn't how she had envisioned the conversation. Jake, who had once been pliable and easily manipulated, now seemed utterly immune to her charms. She had conveniently forgotten the events leading to their divorce and was unprepared for this resolute version of him. Switching tactics, Brooke softened her voice, adopting a sultry tone. Jake, I know I made mistakes, but Rufus was behind it all. He's out of the picture now. We could be good together again. I know how to make you happy, ways that will blow your mind. Dump that frigid witch and come back to me. We could have it all. The good life, the four of us, like a family again. She shifted in her chair, crossing her legs and pushing her augmented chest against the fabric of her blouse, hoping to sway him. But her theatrics had the opposite effect. Jake's expression hardened with disgust. You look and act like a desperate courtesan, he said coldly. Our history tells me I should avoid you at all costs. I wouldn't touch you even wearing a hazmat suit. As for your children, I've made arrangements. Olivia will live at St. Christopher's Crossing when she starts college, and Brian will stay with my mother until he's ready for college. You can't provide a stable home, so I've taken care of it. You, however, won't see a cent from me. In fact, you owe me. Brooke was too stunned to speak as Jake paused, glaring at her. Then he added, If you try to fight me on this, I'll file charges for fraud and extortion. I'll let the courts know the children aren't mine, and that you deceived me during the divorce. Now get out. I've had enough. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Gemma stepped into the room, her radiant smile and obvious baby bump stealing Brooke's attention. She walked over to Jake, kissed him on the cheek, and whispered, You were right. There are two. Jake's grin widened and Brooke's composure shattered. You're pregnant, she blurted, watching her plan to win Jake crumble before her eyes. Gemma and Jake exchanged a glance, then Gemma turned to Brooke with a calm but triumphant smile. Yes, I'm pregnant. I'm giving Jake the children he's always deserved. Now I heard you were leaving. We need to start planning the nursery. Brooke's face twisted in disbelief. Children? As in more than one? Gemma's smile brightened. Yes, twins. I'm 3 months along. The first ultrasound only showed one baby, but the second revealed 2 boys. She leaned down, kissed Jake deeply, and whispered, Boys? In his ear. Brooke stood abruptly. You can't do this to me. You're throwing me aside and taking my children, your niece and nephew, away from me. Jake's patience snapped. His tone turned icy. I don't know what Olivia and Brian are to me, Brooke. You tell me. Keep in mind that Randall wasn't Rufus Sr.'s biological son, and I'm not Randall's biological son either. I'm Rufus Sr.'s son. The only connection we have is through our mother. Brooke's face drained of color as the full weight of Jake's words hit her. Since Randall and Rufus Jr.'s arrests, she had been completely cut off from the Van Dam family. Anna had refused any contact, and Brooke's own life had spiraled into poverty. Living in a dingy apartment and selling her possessions just to scrape by, she was truly alone. Jake's voice cut through her despair. If it were up to me, you'd rot in hell, but my mother and Gemma think otherwise. They believe you should be given a chance because, for better or worse, you're still the mother of your children. They convinced me that if I didn't intervene, you'd become a wreck, and that would eventually affect Olivia and Brian. So I've arranged a job for you. It's physical labor, nothing glamorous, but it will cover your rent and basic living expenses. Brooke's hope dimmed further. She had applied for jobs before, only to face rejection at every turn. Without Jake's intervention, she'd have to leave town entirely, forfeiting any chance of seeing her children again. As Jake's final words sank in, she realized her future was no longer hers to dictate. Jake handed Brooke a card with an address and phone number. Before she could respond, Gemma stepped in. This is your only chance to stay connected with your children. That job is the only option left for you once the lawsuits reach the court. Refuse and we'll wash our hands of you completely. And don't fool yourself. We're not taking your children from you. Olivia and Brian made their own choices. Olivia will live at St. Christopher's Crossing, and Brian is staying with Anna. They both know what you did to the man they thought was their father. Gemma gestured toward the door, signaling it was time for Brooke to leave. As they reached the threshold, Gemma turned, her tone sharp and unyielding. In the end, I win. I have Jake, and I'm carrying his children. Your selfishness ruined any chance you had with him. You gambled on the wrong man for luxury, and now you've lost everything. I have the better man, and you're left with nothing. Her glare hardened. And let me make something crystal clear. If you try anything with Jake, you'll have me to deal with. Hurt him, manipulate the kids, or even attempt to turn them against him, and I will come for you. I won't stop until you're completely destroyed. Do you understand? Brooke's confidence shattered as she stood frozen, stunned by the raw venom in Gemma's words. She barely managed a small, shaky response. Yes, I understand. No contact with Jake unless it's through you. Exactly. Now leave, Gemma snapped. The self-assured woman who had stared into the mirror earlier was gone. In less than an hour, Brooke's world had crumbled, leaving her hollow and defeated. Without another word, she walked to her car, shoulders slumped. Inside the house, Gemma returned to Jake, curling into his lap with a contented sigh. "You're mine," she murmured. "It took nearly 20 years, but we're finally together again. Despite Brooke, and thanks to her stupidity." After a quiet moment, she stood and tugged Jake to his feet, a mischievous smile on her lips. "We need to practice." "Practice for what?" Jake asked, bemused. "Number 3, of course," Gemma teased, giggling as she led him to the bedroom.